recent video on TikTok showed a woman who was essentially snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef who was not happy. She said she was severely underwhelmed by the Great Barrier Reef when she went out snorkeling with her friends, gave a pretty scathing review. And the question really, that I asked myself, is the Great Barrier Reef really in that much trouble? Or was this review sort of blowing things out of proportion? We're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And today we're going to be talking about the Great Barrier Reef, but before we do, I want to talk to you about a trip that I had a number of years ago. I went out with friends, so my wife and two of our good friends, so essentially two couples. We went down to, it wasn't Punta Cana, it was Puerto Plata in Dominican Republic. And we went for like a cheap, all-inclusive vacation. We just wanted to kind of get away. My wife and I had our oldest at that point. She was very young. We left her with the grandparents. We were very happy to have her for the week, and we just kind of chilled out with two good friends, and we had a great time. During that time, I wanted to go diving. And I was super excited because I love going diving in the tropics. You see all the reefs, you see all the different fish, you see the different invertebrates, which is what I love to see. When I scuba dive, I kind of like to sit in one spot and just kind of observe what's happening at a smaller scale, which is a lot of fun for me. And I was looking forward to that. My wife did not want to go diving. I offered it. She has her PADI open water, but she gets seasick. So sometimes she doesn't like going. And so she's like, hey, if you're okay to go by yourself, go ahead. I said, no problem. So I went out on my own. Now, I don't know Spanish, but every time I go to a PADI outfit, which is who I'm certified with, I always have a good time. The people are always great. The dive masters are fantastic. And even if I don't speak the language, a lot of people are very nice and they speak English as best they can if they can't, or they kind of take me with them, and they kind of, it's a lot of hand signals underwater, so it doesn't really matter. So it was really great. I went down, I was really excited. We went on this nice boat. We went for a boat ride. There were a couple of beginners who've never scuba dived in their life. They didn't get certified. So they always have, if you've ever gone diving, they always have sort of a trip for them, and they go into shallow water. They wear the scuba diving equipment, and they just go like to basically knee depth, where they go on their knees, and they can just pop up and they're fine. They're in air. They're not underwater. I went down. I like to go down usually between 40 and 70 feet. That's my comfort area, although I'm certified up to 100 feet. So what happens, we were on this boat. One of the dive masters was my buddy. He said, okay, let's go in Spanish, and we're going to dive, and they're going to go over to another spot, and we're going to dive down here, and they're going to come pick us up when they're done. No problem. So we're going down. We go down. As we go down, I notice the water is fairly cloudy. It's blue water, but it's a little bit, cloudy. And that happens every once in a while. Sometimes there's a rough night, or sometimes it's an area that has high turbidity and you go down. So it wasn't the best visibility, but you get that sometimes, right? When you dive. That's the sort of the wonder and awe of scuba diving. You take the good with the bad. If you don't have perfect visibility, you just kind of have to deal with it, and you go under and you hopefully enjoy the show. I could probably have about 10 feet of visibility, which was fine. So I went down. I had my dive master buddy right beside me the whole time. We went down, and when I got down, the first thing I see is a barracuda. Beautiful barracuda right beside me. It wasn't moving. It was underneath sort of this rockscape, and it was just right underneath this overhang, and it was right underneath. I was probably about 5 feet away from it, so I got to observe. It was really cool colors and stuff. It was the first time I've actually been close to a barracuda. Obviously, you don't want to put your fingers where its mouth is. They can be a little dangerous, but when you view them from 5 feet away, you're good. My hands were behind my back. I was ready to go, and we started to just kind of coast. I was hovering right above the probably about 5 feet off the ground, just so my flippers didn't muck up or didn't stir up some sand. And we started to move around. And I really quickly started to notice that there wasn't a lot of reef around, which is fine. I was expecting more, but there were rocks and there was a lot of bleach coral and a lot of corals that looked like they had, either half bleach or they had some kind of disease on them. Some of the flesh was coming off and so forth. So it wasn't the best shape. And that, again, this happens. Sometimes you're in an area where it's really nice. Sometimes you're in an area where it can be heavy with tourists, or it could just be in a very exposed area, or it could be really shallow and the sun is just beaming on it. We're in an area or an era of climate change. Now, this was probably about over 10 years ago, 12 years ago. But regardless, I was continuing going on with my dive buddy, and we were just, looking around. We saw some cool eels, and we saw some, more barracuda, some great fish, some parrotfish, rainbow parrotfish and stuff. It was awesome. I really enjoyed myself to a point. When we got to the surface, we were, sitting there, and it was actually kind of interesting. The dive master couldn't speak English very well. I couldn't speak Spanish very well. But we just kind of laid out. We kind of looked at each other, smiled, giggled every once in a while, being like, this was great. Like, this is awesome. And we were waiting for the boat to come pick us up. So you're kind of in the middle. You can see the people where we were. We weren't far offshore. We can see the people down the way where our boat was. So there was always visibility. There was no worry of anybody coming and not coming to get us, or any animal coming and harassing us or anything like that. We were just kind of just floating and just enjoying the weather, I would pop down and snorkel for a bit, and just see how I could see the bottom, not very well because of the visibility, but I could see the bottom. And so sometimes I like to look at the way the rays hit the surface of the water. When you look down, it kind of looks pretty cool. If those of you who scuba dive or snorkel will kind of be able to understand that. And so it was a really fun time. I really enjoyed it to a certain degree. When I got back we got picked up, and I got back to my wife and my friends, and they were like, what was it like? I'm like, it was okay. I saw some pretty cool animals, but the reef wasn't in great shape. And the visibility was about 10, maybe 15 feet at times. And so that wasn't the best. But I had a good time. Like, it was a dive, and I got to go underwater. I got to scuba dive. I got it out of my system because I don't usually scuba dive here in Canada. But when I go down south, I'll scuba dive. And so it was fun to do it. Would I pay for it to do it the next day? No, probably not. Just because I think I've seen everything that I would see, even if it was a different area. But I had fun. And that was my review. It was more of meh. It was pretty good. I got to go underwater. That's always fun. Got to see some tropical animals. That was always fun, and some fish and some invertebrates and stuff like that. But overall, not my favorite dive in the world. I've had much better dives before and after that. But that was my review. Right? And I take it with a grain of salt. I always tell people, there could be better places in Dominican, but I wasn't overly impressed. Would I go again? Maybe not, unless somebody promised me some better reefs. But that's the way it goes sometimes in some places, especially nowadays with, climate change, rearing its ugly head. But, that was my review. And so I came across an interesting video. This is where we're getting at here. I came across an interesting video on TikTok. Actually, it was a news article that had a video on TikTok where somebody who was snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef kind of gave a review while she was in the Great Barrier Reef. She was at the surface. She had her phone out, I guess, and recorded it, or a video. I don't know how it was recorded. But you could hear it, and she's like, I'm snorkeling the Great Barrier Reef right now, and it sucks. It was underwhelming. She didn't say it sucks, but she's like, I'm severely underwhelmed. She said there wasn't much coral. It was a lot of rubble. The visibility wasn't that great. There was white fluff like all around, making it kind of sound like the rubble was kind of being stirred up. It didn't look like sand. There was a video of it. It didn't look like sand. It just kind of looked like, pieces of something floating around, but lots of it. So the visibility wasn't the best. It was still pretty good visibility, but there wasn't much to look at where that person was. So I can understand the little bit of disappointment. And, she said, hey, we're supposed to be, the dive operator said we're in the best area for viewing the Great Barrier Reef, which, again, I take with a grain of salt. It's a tour operator. Of course, their area is always going to be the best area. But regardless, that's what she said. She said the weather the water was choppy. The weather wasn't that great. It was raining. It was a little chilly, so they were cold. And she said the best part of the trip was that the fact that she had coffee, and that kept her warm, which I can understand. If you're cold, it could be pretty miserable coming out of that water, and you being cold and windy is what those conditions looked like. And she was like, I'm not sure why the dive operator would come out or have us come out here when it's fairly dangerous, as she I'm quoting her saying. And so she was, I think with the entire trip, it was pretty bad. Now, when I came across the article on Yahoo News, and I will link to the article in the show notes, I thought to myself, this seems more of an article. My first impression was this is more of an article on the state of the Great Barrier Reef. Is the Great Barrier Reef actually in good shape, or is it in bad shape? We know over the past number of years that major bleaching has happened to the Great Barrier Reef. And a few years ago, there was, over 90% of the Great Barrier Reef were bleached. Now, most of those areas recovered, where the zooanthelle would go back into the bleached coral and get its color again, and they would survive. Some areas did not survive well, but they're being rebuilt, or they're, over time they'll regenerate, hopefully. But most of the areas were able to, survive the bleaching event. And over time, with temperatures getting hotter for longer, over 40 degrees for longer, the sea surface temperature of the ocean has increased. Ocean acidification has gotten worse, meaning the ocean is getting more acidic, which means less calcium carbonate for the corals to pick up to build their shell, their limestone shell, their calcium shell, or skeleton, I should say. And so, it's been a rough ride over the last number of decades. So I'm sure there are areas within the Great Barrier Reef that are absolutely horrible. Now, during the video, the person did say that there were fish that came to the back of the boat, the stern of the boat, when they fed the water, when they put food in the water, and they actually, you started to see these large queen angelfish come up, or these angelfish come up and feed, which was kind of cool, and the person got pretty excited. Well, obviously, you don't want to feed the fish as a way to increase the number of fish that are coming to the area, because that can affect a lot of different things ecologically. You don't want to feed anything in the wild. But that was what they did. They wanted to ensure that people got what they saw, since maybe the dive wasn't as great, where they took them wasn't as great. I assure you, I've never been to the Great Barrier Reef, but I assure you there are areas where the coral reef is better. I assure you that the visibility is better on certain days rather than others. In a day where you see lots of wind, in a day where it's a little choppier, and it's raining, there's going to be stuff that gets, sort of drummed up in the water, and you're going to get lower visibility, and you're going to get stuff that's floating in the water. That's the wonder of the ocean. From that standpoint, when I can understand the frustration. If you look at what she videoed and she showed on her TikTok video, which is linked in the show notes, you'll see that there looks like it's just rubble. There looks like there's no coral whatsoever. Now, I don't know if that's the full area, what they were able to survey or what they were able to do, but it doesn't look great. It definitely wasn't the best place in the Great Barrier Reef. I can assure you that, even though I haven't been there. I can assure you there are places where the Great Barrier Reef is doing well for the state that the world's in, but not just rubble everywhere they go, right? From the visibility standpoint, that's just the variability of the ocean. There's certain days you'll go out where it's wonderful, and it's dead calm. It's like glass on the surface, and underneath it's just perfect. But let's be honest, it's the ocean. There are waves in the ocean. It happens. Visibility will get worse in the ocean, no matter where you are, whether you're on a beautiful coral reef or whether you're in the deep ocean. Visibility will go up and down depending on what's in the water and what's around it, and how things. And if it's shallow, it can even get even more stirred up with the winds and stuff, and the sand kind of coming up. You just never know what's going to happen. That's just life in the ocean, right? If it's cold outside and it's windy outside, and the tour operator says, yeah, we're still going to go, and you booked, you kind of have to go. I understand that. And it's not the best or opportune time to go. I would not want to go when the weather's not great. With that said, my wife and I have gone diving in Jamaica when the weather was absolutely horrible, when it was, pouring down raining cats and dogs, right? And it was, the water was choppy. And we went in because we knew at the bottom of the ocean it wouldn't be as choppy, and we're going to get wet anyway, so we might as well go diving on a day where it's raining, rather than waste time. If we wanted to go hiking or we want to do an excursion wherever we were going, we were staying in a cottagey type place on the ocean. You go diving when you're going to get wet. So if it's going to be raining, you might as well go diving. So we've gone diving on days where it's super choppy and days where it's raining. Usually those coincide. Now, my wife didn't like it because, like I said before, she gets seasick. But we were able to go diving. We had a perfectly great time. So when you see reviews coming up on TikTok, this is really the whole point of this episode. When you see reviews coming up on TikTok, you have to take it with a grain of salt. You have to really understand, I understand from a point of you're paying for a trip, you want it to go out on the nicest day. You're not always going to get the nicest day on the ocean. Some areas it could be perfectly nice and slick and glass, and other areas at the same day, in just a different area a couple kilometers away, it might be wavy. It might be choppy, and the visibility might not be the best in shallow areas. Especially if you're snorkeling. If you're diving, you can go down deeper where it's less choppy, less wavy, and then you can finally get to the calm of it all, and then you can see what's happening with the corals. Now, I've been in times where it's been a little bit wavy, and there's a bit of a current, and I've been in coral reef that's like really, old growth coral reef with soft corals and moving back and forth in the waves, and it's absolutely beautiful. But I can understand somebody being disappointed if you don't see reefs, because just at the beginning of this podcast, when I mentioned my story of the Dominican, where when I went and there wasn't a lot of coral reefs, there weren't a lot of species, the diversity was very low, I was a bit disappointed. But I understood that is the nature of the game with scuba diving. I could have done maybe a little bit more research in terms of what people were looking for, or what people have their experiences diving in that same area, and to find out where the best place to go and where's not the worst places to go, and then be able to navigate through that. But unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. And for the fact that this person was told this is the best area in the Great Barrier Reef, I feel like there are better areas, and maybe this outfit may not have been the best in telling them that this was the best area, or maybe they made a mistake. I don't know. But I feel like there are times where you have to look at videos and reviews where you're like, is this really good or is this not really good? People have different levels of expectations, and if they're not met, which I understand, people get disappointed. I'm not judging this person by any means. They expected a beautiful day. They expected, bright corals and lots of visibility. And they didn't get it, and they're disappointed. Totally understand that, right? And I would be that disappointed too if I expected that, if I didn't know the ocean the way I did. So I think you have to take these reviews with a grain of salt. Is the Great Barrier Reef in trouble? Potentially, right? There's a lot of weather coming in, a lot of climate change coming in. It could get worse. But there's a lot of great things about the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, because there's a great management plan to it. And it's probably doing the best out of all the reefs, or potentially doing the best out of all the reefs, because it's managed pretty well. So if you can manage a lot of the human activities around it, like fishing and tourism and all that kind of stuff, maybe you can get better areas and sort of make it more resilient towards climate change and stuff, because you can take out those extractive or those disruptive practices in certain areas. So that's just kind of what I wanted to cover today, because, this is a podcast day where we talk about living for a better ocean. I think we have to look at our expectations when we go out on these trips and understand that they could be different for everybody. And so when you hear a review, or you listen to a review, or you read a review, understand that they'll be different for everybody. When I go to a hotel, or when I go away to a resort, or when I go away somewhere, I look at reviews. My wife and I, we look at reviews. We go to TripAdvisor, which is usually pretty good. But then you get to, you want to read all the reviews, different ones, because certain people have different expectations than others. And a lot of times, those expectations are not the expectations that we have. They're a little higher than what we expect. And so we understand a little bit more of those. And I think that's what you really need to do, is look at a number of different reviews, right? The more you have in a specific area, and if they're bad, then maybe don't go to that area, or don't go with that outfit. Go with a different one if you're going to visit. But if you spend your money to go all the way to Australia, say from North America, like if I went to Australia and I went on the Great Barrier Reef, I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty hyped up if that happens, right? One day that'll happen, right? And if I go out and I don't have a great time, then I'll be pretty disappointed. I assure you that. I'll be pretty disappointed. But if I go and have a great time, then my review is going to be very different from this woman. And I think that's what we have to really look at. The Great Barrier Reef is a huge place. It spans from equivalent of the top of BC, or like middle of BC, all the way down to California. And so that's a big area. So we have to sort of manage our expectations and what the Great Barrier Reef is and what kind of condition it is. I'm not saying it's all, beautiful corals everywhere and perfectly healthy, but there are some places that are pretty good. So manage those expectations. And I would love to hear your experiences at the Great Barrier Reef when you went to visit, when you went diving or snorkeling or whatever that might be. Let me know what you thought. Hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. Or email me by going to speakupforblue.com/contact. And if you want more information on the ocean, hit us up on our newsletter, sign up for it. Go to speakupforbblue.com/newsletter, all one word. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.